But there are several types of criteria I look for in my plots. First, size. Does it meet my needs? I grow on everywhere from 300 square feet to 2,500 square feet on some plots. So in terms of my production, how does this size of this plot fit into my operation? Topography, physical conditions. Does it slope? What are the soil conditions? Is there organic matter? Was it sprayed with pesticides? What's its past use, especially in terms of urban agriculture, heavy metals? Sunshine. Does it get 6 hours of sunshine a day, which means I'm not going to want my tomatoes there? Or, how does the sun affect it? And it's going to play a very important role in my crop planning, of what crops go where. Site access, vehicle access, how do you get to and from your site? Vehicle, bike, utility access. One of the things I'm going to stress is commercial refrigeration. And so is there electric there, or how do you incorporate where that refrigeration is? Water rights, community relationships and neighbors, do they accept it? How many of you have had vandalism problems? Quite a few. I haven't, but it's an issue, especially if you're trying to make a living at it. Buffer zones, if you're in an industrial park or just next to some business, or you just want some type of buffer zone, how is that going to look? In terms of organic regulations, there is actually no set distance. Most certifiers go 15 to 25 feet. But what are you trying to buffer out, and how are you going to do it? Security, are you safe? Are your crops safe? Are you storing tools on site, and where are you storing them? And also site control in terms of availability. If you're not going to own all these properties, is there a way to build equity? Can you get a long-term lease? Can you build soil over those years and put in cover crops? And so that all has to play into effect in terms of what plot I'm going to go with. Last year we decided to stick to 1-year leases just to give everything a shot. We didn't know what was going to happen this year. One plot this year we signed a 4-year lease to renew it at the school. So it just depends. So online there are several different lease agreements that are available. City Garden Farms is one of them. But generally speaking, this is what I look for in all my leases. In every plot I have, I do sign a lease. And basically it's to protect me, that I'm investing this money, and I don't want something to happen. Last year, one of our plots, unexpectedly, the gentleman had to sell the house right in the middle of our season. So that really affected us. And so first and foremost is the terms of the agreement. What's your start date and what's your end date? Again, this is commercial production, and that's got to be laid out. And if something happens, how do you deal with that issue? Are you going to rent it? Barter. We traded one of our plots in Pennsylvania just for a share of our CSA. Worked out great. Do you just have to upkeep the property? What's the agreement? A lot of farmers I know are paying around $100 for a plot that includes water. Some landowners want you to meter the water to offset the difference. That's not a big cost. Anyone here lease land and have a price they want to throw out? No?
I rented a meter. I was in the Baltimore County, and I rented a meter from the water works. You can go out there, pull the information out and rent it. Basically, you put it on the fire hydrant. I had a fire hydrant close by, right, like 300 feet of garden hose, like a field, tap off of that. And, it was relatively at the time. I think it was units 1,000 gallons. Meter, and I think it was 0.08 cents a unit, something like that. So it was relatively cheap for water. And of course, I was hand watering very close to the plants. I wasn't doing like overhead or nothing like that. And it was relatively cheap.
Okay.
Less than $100 for the whole year.
Yeah.
For almost an acre. That was a little water, wasn't as intense as this one. And the ground was rougher, and of course I lost that too. The farmer I rented from, because I had honeybees on there, so I said, look, I put some bees on the property to kind of sweeten it up, right? We're in too, pollinate. And I didn't know that, but 2 years later I found out that some piece of ground across the road from this place was renting it from somebody else. So the guy went to build a house or something, so I had like, year before, like 80 yards of compost come in and put down, so that was all, grass. So yeah, so you get it pretty cheap.
Yeah. All right. Appearance. How are you going to maintain the property and keep it up? You know, my big thing is a good-looking farm is a good earning farm, and I think that goes with every plot. And if you trash a plot, you know, the landowner's not going to want you there. Insurance, that's a big one. Every landowner's probably going to ask you about insurance. We have a $2 million liability. I think we pay $400 a year, and that covers all of our properties. Yeah, so if something happens, including the landowner's going to ask, you know, it's a cost, but I don't think it's a significant cost. Yes?
Where did you purchase your liability insurance?
We got our insurance from, I'm sorry?
Was it government backed or was it a private insurer?
It would be Farm Bureau for our liability insurance.
So the county farm bureau?
Yeah. For farmers markets, the National Farmers Market Coalition now has an agreement with an insurance company where they can provide farmers market insurance. And, yeah, you can go right through that, which is really good. There's also insurance through, well, crop insurance you can get through Risk Management Agency. There's also Farm Service Agency, another division of FSA. They offer several different types of insurance. You know, I can't say they're great, but it's pretty much what's available. Crops grown, it's a great idea to put on there, you know, at this plot I'm going to be growing these crops. Especially because on all these different plots, when we do our planting, it's not just, you know, whatever's available, we're going to put this crop in. You know, we like to be very specific, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but having that in the lease as well. Growing practices, this is a great one. We practice organic standards. It is difficult to certify an urban farm, I will say that, in terms of your rotations and having, you know, being able to meet all the NOP requirements. But you know, if there's a pathway to their garage and they see a few dandelions they want to go out there with Roundup, you know, I have issues with that, especially when I have edible crops growing right there. So pointing that out as well. Work schedule. I found this to be a lot more important than I originally thought. Explaining to the landowner when you're going to be there and really trying to have a set established time. You know, Mondays I'm at this plot, you know, I'm trying to do this. But if you do have to show up unexpectedly, trying to give enough notice is really helpful as opposed to just showing up. They really appreciate that. Water usage we just sort of touched on in case you have to, you know, offset the meter, which isn't expensive. Most landowners usually don't have a problem. They can include the water bill in the lease, but you know, some of them do ask to set up the meter and just pay the difference off of it. Equipment, I always like to explain what equipment will be on the property. We have a lot of sharp tools. We have a tiller, and if we're storing it there, or you know, even when it's just on the property, just knowing that there's knives and harvesting tools. Not a U-pick, this is my favorite. I can just imagine the landowner comes home, looks out back, sees a salad bar, doesn't want to make dinner, just wants to go harvest. It's really important to explain. You're trying to make money here. This is commercial production. They can't be out there harvesting. Let alone you're losing the crop. You have no idea their techniques, if it's going to cause disease damage, you know, what's going to happen. There's a lot of risk involved with someone else being out there. And finally, close down. How do you leave the property at the end of the season? My goal is to build soil. So if I can get a lease and put in a cover crop, that's my goal. Not every landowner is going to want rye and vetch in their front yard. You have to put it back in turf. You just have to, you know, level it out. I've run in all sorts of different situations, and I think it's very specific. But you know, for me, my goal is to build soil. And as a result, I take on a lot more properties than I produce on. I think that's sort of our insurance. In case something happens, we can go somewhere else. And just knowing long term. I don't know where our farm is going to be in 3 years, but if I can build soil during that time, all the better. So I'll hand somewhere.
What do you do about, ask about agree about pets? Notice that people, you know, just to say it's, you don't pick your own, but, you know, you're giving about their pets or anything else, coming in, digging, pulling out, defecating, any of that stuff.
That's a good point. I haven't run into that. I think more of the issue would be related to food safety. Whether it's the landowner's pet, which you'd have to leave a space for their animals, unless they're going to walk them or something. But I tend, you know, if I bring my dog to the property, what about that as well? But I think that really gets into food safety, which is a huge issue in terms of, should dogs be allowed at farmers markets? A lot of the complaint now is for farmers is there's all these regulations coming down on food safety, but they haven't talked anything about, what if a deer's there or bird poop. They're just saying, if it's your own animal. We'll talk a little bit about food safety here in a few minutes, but touch the subject. Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned the farm credit a little earlier. People want you to come and farm their land because they want the farm credit. Do you have something on that, a little more to mention or something in Big Bird?
Well, that's specific to New
Is that
Hampshire.
specific to New Hampshire?
So I don't know if there's an ag tax credit in Maryland.
There is not in Baltimore City. It's something that some people are working on because it would incentivize landowners to make more land available. So there are some people pretty actively working on that. If anyone wants more
Is
information.
it other counties in Maryland that possibly do that?
I believe there is. I believe in the
Some
counties
counties?
there are some
credits.
incentives, just not in the city.
And then I wanted to know on marketing, do you use co-ops at all in your marketing, areas of marketing?
A little bit. We'll talk about marketing here. But yes, I think co-ops are a great way to manage your risks if you can get a fair price. My ideal situation would be, and not to get off subject here, but if I was able to go down in terms of a co-op and just grow a few crops as opposed to 50 different crops, I think that would really help out my farm.
So you're talking a co-op that would encourage a group of farmers that would specialize in a certain
Yep.
family,
Or this farmer grows this many crops, this farmer grows this many crops.
not type of crops, or just the amount?
Both. So
Both.
if I was able to limit the type of crop and focus on that one, I think my farm would be a lot better. I'm not saying that for every farm. So I don't want to get into soil contamination here, but in terms of urban soils, you gotta do a soil test. Especially in Baltimore, heavy metals. I think you've had a class on it.
Yeah, there's a recording on the website with that workshop, and by the fall or pretty soon there will be a bunch of resources from the city specific to that. So stay
Okay.
tuned, get in touch if you have questions. Yeah.
Excellent. And so just a few components I do want to point out. And like I said, you've got to have a soil test done. I'm guessing the University of Maryland still does soil tests?
No,
No, okay. They're shipping
Well,
them to
we're
Boston or
working-
somewhere?
we're working on that.
Mass.
Yes.
Yeah, UMass.
Amherst.
So I send mine to UMass. UMass is really good, but it's important to know, in land-grant universities, they're under $20 for soil tests. But you have to understand that these tests are geared towards large-scale farms, and they're geared towards conventional farms. So you may find out your NPK rates, your pH, organic matter even. You could test separately for heavy metals. You could test your compost. But you've got to understand the results are coming back based on acreage, which you're going to sit there and go, what? How does that all work? And then they're going to say, apply 15 pounds of ammonium nitrate or something. And then you're also going to scratch your head and say, what? So there are alternative labs out there. And in fact, on the ATRO website, we have, it should still be there, a directory of alternative testing laboratories. And I updated it last week, so it's actually in the process of being reformatted. I'm probably going to turn it into a database. But just know that they're out there, and they're going to cost a little bit more money, but they're going to come back and tell you specifically how to apply to your piece of land, including a lot of them now are talking in square footage instead of acreage, and also in terms of sustainable organic recommendations. So they're not going to say ammonium nitrate. They're going to give some alternatives, and I highly recommend that. And just understand the difference based on a land-grant university, although UMass does offer alternative testing now.
All right.
So the big heavy metals, lead, arsenic, cadmium, lead's the big one. But I do want to point out that all the EPA regulations are based on soils. They're not specific to growing food. So it doesn't matter if you want to put in a playground, a golf course, or a garden. They only have one number right now, and that's the threshold. So it's not specific to growing food. And for lead, the magic number is 400 parts per million. And there's lots of information out there. I don't want to waste time now on the heavy metals.
The city will be coming out with its own standards in the near future. So.
There's a lot of misinformation out there too. For example, sunflowers. There's been a lot of reports that sunflowers soak up lead. They found out that research was faulty, and there was actually an agent involved in the soil that caused that binding. So there's lots of plants, mustards, pennycress that can soak up heavy metals, but if you see anything in sunflowers, it's actually faulty research. The EPA does not support that. Interestingly, I found this out last year that you can get heavy metals in your hose, in your water hose. And according to the EPA, if water sitting in the hose that's been left in the sun can contain 10 to 100 times the EPA safe level, that's for water. That's a whole different level, so it's parts per billion, not your soil levels. But they recommend, use drink-safe hoses, lead-free, or RV marine hoses. Also, your fittings play a difference, nickel fittings instead of brass. But that could all, eventually get into the soil. Some of you remember unleaded and leaded gasoline options up until, 1978, I think. Lead paint, especially around Baltimore with all these brownstones, and you look around, just the windows, there's probably lead paint there. And that stuff binds in the soil. It's not going anywhere. Right. Also, fertilizers, including organic fertilizers. There's some level of heavy metals in most of them. And there's actually no federal standards for the amount that can be in a fertilizer. OMRI, which is a third-party verification system for organics. So if you are certified organic or want to stick with organic products that are allowed for use in organic regulations, you can go to the OMRI book or website, look up a product, and if it's OMRI certified, they actually do test for heavy metals. Just know that it is a third-party verification system. They are not a certifier. But it's amazing. Here's a product, ironite. Ironite you can buy at Home Depot in many states, and it's got 3,600 parts per million arsenic, 29 parts per million lead. It's considered a hazardous waste, and you can buy this over the shelf at Home Depot in several states. It's illegal in most states now, but you should check out their website too for ironite, this product. They're based out of the Southwest, and the whole website's about how we're just a natural product, and it's safe to use everywhere. You look at these levels, I don't want that anywhere near my food. All right, any questions? What's that?
Julie Blue.
Yeah, right. So, as I mentioned, I got involved with spin farming in 2008. That same year, I began traveling around the country teaching it, and I started the first university spin farm in Pennsylvania. Can you back up a little? Where you going? One more, right there.
This one?
Yeah. I should have pointed this picture out. So we started the first university spin farm. We were supposed to be on campus. We had a beautiful site right next to a greenhouse. The day we brought in the plants to till and get started, big issue happened, and basically they gave us this plot, which was down the road. There was a restaurant here. They tore the restaurant down. They brought in 4 feet of topsoil, and basically said, "Yeah, here you go." But does anyone see any problems with that picture, with that plot? This is a building, just an apartment building.
Should I go on that?
I'm sorry?
I didn't know if you would have missed it. But it's a parking lot. That's
Anything else? She said the parking lot?
Security.
Security?
You're close to the road, Harvard Complex, they probably got feed issues down the road too, it's the place off the beach now. Topsoil, where do they get that from? Topsoil-
River bottom soil.
Topsoil's kind of vague, they probably have stuff in it too, yeah.
And then we brought in, I will say we amended, well, I don't want to go this way, but yeah, we brought in compost, all sorts of stuff. I mean, this is what, when we first walked out there, what they gave us. So the parking lot's the big one. Just having these cars parked right up here, there's no berm. I put one in, but that's a huge problem. I actually recommended that they cut flowers into the whole block. I didn't win that battle, so if you know anyone that eats at the cafeteria, don't eat at the salad bar. The road, this is actually an intersection with a 4-way light. I didn't know if cars sitting here idling, if the exhaust would affect my crops at all. Overhead lighting, I didn't know what type of light that was. It was going to affect my germination and vegetative state of plants. What else? Someone said security or fencing.
Well, yeah, it's so open and cars could run over it, kids could walk through it.
Which happened, yep, we put up a fence. What's amazing is when we walked out there, we had all these neighbors sitting on the front porch just laughing at us. What, you're gonna put a garden in there? But sure enough, you know, once they saw the plants, everyone was out helping. And they all supported it, they all protected it, and they all ate from it. They were customers. But the parking lot's a big one. Next. So we got involved with Spin, and basically, to make a long story short, this is Wally Saswich. Wally is the founder of Spin. He's up in Saskatoon, Canada. Wally was on 20 acres farming with draft horses. Basically, ended up putting his parents' backyard or house in the city into greens, and realized in the first season he was making more money off the greens than he was on his 20 acres. Sold his horses, sold his farm, moved to the city, and he's currently on 25 backyards, less than an acre. They range in size from about 300 square feet to 2,500 square feet. And you may see a lot of numbers of what he makes and stuff, but you know, it all depends on your market. And if you're around tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit about numbers. But basically, he developed this system that you're going to see here in a minute. It's based on sub-acreage. And if you remember that chart, 1 to 3 acres, et cetera, et cetera. Once you go past that sort of 1 acre mark, your whole system changes in terms of your labor, your equipment, your infrastructure. So this is specifically geared for less than an acre. I would say you can go over a little bit on an acre, but at some point you've got to understand you're investing too much into your labor or somewhere you're losing money. That you've got to scale up in terms of your investments. So it's low capital intensive, which Joel Salatin said, close to markets, environmental friendly, and again, it's commercial production. There is a site now for Spin Gardening if you're not interested in the marketing component. Just sort of talks about the techniques, but what we want to focus on is commercial production here. So a couple terms that really are the backbone to how we developed the system for our farm and what we based it on from Wally. And the first is having the standard size bed. And the measurement is 2 feet wide by 25 feet long. Now I will say you can really have any number there, but there's reasons this number works. But first and foremost is having a target revenue that you want to reach in your year. So having any number just to figure out what goes into that formula is what you need. So we use this number because of the other benefits as well, which are, one is the width of our rototiller. We use a BCS, it's 2 feet. The larger steer model I think is up to 32 inches, so you can make it work. But generally speaking, walk-behind tractor is about 2 feet. Most hose lengths sort of fit into this dimension. I won't say every one of our beds is 25 feet long. It's very site-specific. Some beds I put in 12 feet, some less, some more. It also depends on the crop. But also having this component of being able to straddle the bed. And what this really does is show that the smaller our land base, the more intensely planted we want it. The smaller our land base, the more production we want on that land base. So we have a nice bed here. We're able to straddle it comfortably so that we don't have a lot of walkway space, and that we can do all of our seeding, our weeding, our harvesting, moving up and down the bed very efficiently in that position. It doesn't work for everyone. You have bad knees, bad back. You can make it work for you. I know one farmer, she built a bench and just moves it right along her beds. But again, the idea is to really maximize your space. And here we have 1 foot walkways. That may not work for you. Basically, that means you've got to train yourself to walk like this. And if you're not straddling the bed, you've got to do all your seating and everything walking like that on the side. It's difficult. There's definitely a learning curve. So for a half acre, it's about 200 standard sized beds. I would say if you want a half acre in production, between all your walkways, possibly some bigger rows for a garden cart or vehicle, post-harvest station, whatever you're doing on that plot, you're going to need 3/4 to a full acre for about a half acre of production, give or take.
Sorry, what was that for? What was the
If you want an acre of production, with all your walkways and space to do everything else, you're generally looking, you'll need about 3/4 to an acre.
You want a half acre.
A half acre of production. Yep. So one of the things we started to do, and I just mentioned this with soil tests, is we started looking at things in terms of segments, 1,000 square feet. And this was a total shift in our mind. Instead of thinking of acreage, we're now thinking in square feet. And so a segment of 1,000 square feet, it's about 10 to 13 standard size beds. And there's definitely a learning curve, but as you scale up in terms of these systems, then you really start to focus on more of thinking of segments instead of just individual beds. Right. So just looking at this briefly, I wouldn't say I hold true to all of this, but generally speaking, it's crop specific. So some of these crops, I know I can't, for a lot of these, put in a 1-foot walkway. There's just no way. So here we do 36 inch. So it's very crop specific. But again, the more intensely planted, I'm going to focus on certain crops, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and that's using the 1-foot walkway. Yes?
Are you growing, do you have a hoop house somewhere where you're growing your babies, or you're buying them, or you're just drug seeding everything?
We have several hoop houses, but most of these are direct seeded for high value crops. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but then moving down here, at least first planting, all these are transplanted. Where you all live, you can probably get a direct seed second, even third crop in, not where I live.
Oh, the next one,
Yeah.
like some, every one. That's kidding. Do you rototill every year? Because you know how people are getting this adding compost every couple of years, you should probably stop rototilling. Because you're disturbing the soil, killing the worms, and changing the layers that the soil likes to naturally be.
Yeah, can everyone hear? She's asking about rototilling and disrupting the soil life, microbes. We're going to talk about that in terms here of a rototiller. In terms of commercial production, I rely on tilling. For my home garden, we use the biointensive method, which is double digging. If I try double digging beds for every rotation in succession I got to do, there's just no way. So yeah, I rely heavily on my rototiller.
And because you're doing this leasing, not really your own land, you're using different methods, and you would use like I have raised beds. I no longer have to till them because they've got enough.
Just permanent raised beds?
Till that I don't have to till them anymore. It took me 4 years to get there, but you can't do that there because it's too permanent.
No. And I will say, initially in the season, especially if there's a cover crop, I'm going to till deeper. But through the season, if I just got to get a direct seeded greens in or something, and especially as that soil temperature warms up, my tilling is much shallower. So I'm going to adjust that throughout the season. Is there another hand?
Would you recommend, or are you going to discuss vertical growing?
A little bit. There's a couple slides coming up,
Okay.
so not too much.
We'll be
It's
talking
after
about
some.
that next
Yeah.
second half.
What's that?
Part 2. Anyone here familiar with permaculture? In your zones, basically the more energy intensive you want closer to your home, and the less energy is sort of how you scale out. Sort of the same concept here. We're going to set up zones. Zone 1 is an area where only a single crop per season is grown. Zone 2 is an area where 2 crops per season are grown. And Zone 3 is an area where 3 or more crops per season are grown. So very similar to permaculture. And basically, you may hear of succession planting. We just call them relays. It's a sequential growing of crops in a single bed throughout the growing season. We do 2 types of relays. We have a bi-relay and an intensive relay. The bi-relay is 2 crops per bed per season. And these are high-value crops. The intensive relay is 3 or more high-value crops per bed per season. Some of you are probably now asking, what's a high-value crop? Maybe. So my goal with our farm is for every harvest out of our standard size bed, 2 feet wide by 25 feet long, we want $100. If I don't get that $100 and I do a crop enterprise budget, I know I'm going to lose money. So there's also very high value crops that are going to generate much more than $100, and I'm going to show you some examples here. But again, my goal is for every harvest to generate $100 out of that bed. Okay? So this, starting in 2008, This is basically what it looked like in terms of our high value and low value crops. Now, a low value crop, I can't go to market without tomatoes. We're known for our garlic. But again, in terms of those relays, I'm not getting the intensity, those generations, those $100 generations, if I'm focused on these crops. Because I'm not getting the relays out. So if I got to go with tomatoes, that's taking up a lot of space and a lot of time. Where I could be generating high value crops 3 or so successions by the time I'm harvesting tomatoes. So there's a value in that. So what I would say though is this is what it looked like in 2008. As of last year, we've got it down so everything but these crops in red would be a high value crop. So we've been able to shift that over. It's specific to your markets, your operation. But I'd like to still keep this separate because in terms of your space, those are the crops you really need to set on in terms of your scale, competition, and really where the money's at. So I'm dividing up the crops. The intensive relay, we have our greens, our herbs, beets, bunching onions, green garlic, radishes, and the bi-relay, beans, carrots, peas. Things are going to take a little bit longer, they're going to be in the ground longer. And tomorrow if you're here, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of this game you've got to play in terms of what happens if I leave it in or what happens if I take it out. In terms of value and also maturity. What happens if it bolts if I leave it in? Or what if I, kale. Kale's a good example for us because I have some markets where the restaurants want baby kale, so I have specific beds for baby kale. I have other markets where they want larger kale for blanching or steaming. So it's a whole different market, a whole different bed, same crop, but I'm harvesting it at different times. And then the single crop, garlic, shallots, onions, potatoes, squash, tomatoes, that stuff. What I like about this picture too is this idea that being in a backyard system or a small scale system, there's such great opportunities for landscaping and here's all our cut flower production. We're just maximizing that space, a little bit of vertical growing, but really taking effect of all that. Larger scale farm, they're just not going to bother. Perimeter plantings, rhubarb we grow in alleys, people love it.
Your flowers and such on the permanent thing on the front, you get all your beneficial insects in there also.
Yep. Pest management, absolutely. Pollination. Right. So just a couple examples. I should really update this slide, but a 3-member relay, starting in the spring with spinach, going into radish, going into carrots, harvest in the fall, even late fall, scallion, lettuce, spinach in the fall, lettuce, scallion, baby dill. Usually we don't do 2 plants right after each other, but radish is so short and it's a light feeder. And I'll show you some intercropping here in a minute, but we're able to do 2 plantings of radish, harvest, 28 days, then go to scallion, spinach in the fall, lettuce, baby dill, lettuce, radish in the fall. Something like that. So I sort of touched on this before, but basically this idea is the smaller your land base, the more intensely planted you want it. And you're going to base it on those high value crops. There's not much value if I just take 1 plot and that's all I have and just put it in tomatoes. As opposed to if I put that plot into greens, salad mix where I'm getting 4, 6 relays out of that at $100 a bed, there's a much different value there. So if you look at a seed pack, it'll show you spacing on it. That's mostly based on mechanical cultivation. So we know going to this scale, I'm relying on hand labor, hand tools, that I can intensely plant more than what's on that seed pack. And I may have yield diminished per plant, but I know per row and per bed that's going to increase on this system. So this is sort of, I think, an experiment I like to do, but I'm really into intercropping. Maybe that's the permaculture in me, but everyone familiar with 3 Sisters? Native American planting corn, beans, squash. So we do that. Although I'm done growing corn for market, I just can't compete. It's just not worth it. So we grow for home use. But we do corn, beans, squash. Kids love it. This is a trick I learned from an old timer here in Maryland. Plant your carrots and radish right over it at the same time. And that basically marks your row for cultivating the carrots. Then you can pull out the radish and your carrots come right up. Past few years, I planted all my potatoes and radish beds right over them. And you know, I've just, even though that's my potato plot, I've gotten a $100 harvest of radish over each of those beds. Maximize that space. Yes?
Yeah, I've been interested in this three-sister planting for some time, and I've been experimenting with it, but I haven't quite got the timing down. It seems to me that, you know, the corn grows slower than the beans choke out the corn, the squash chokes it all out. And I'm trying to figure out when to plant each one, as, you know, as opposed to, they can't all go down at the same time, is what I'm saying.
So the key that I've learned with Three Sisters is we actually transplant the corn and direct seed the others.
Okay, so you direct sow.
But that's sort of a foreign concept, you know, who transplants corn?
So-
John Jeevens does.
So you direct sow the others,
You could transplant them, I'd say we do both, but yeah, transplanting the corn.
so when you, in other words, how big are the others when you transplant the corn? And how big is the corn?
I mean, they've hardened off, they're ready to go on the ground. Down here, gosh, we were looking at corn driving down here, I mean, your corn's this high, mine hasn't even germinated. I mean, it's a different, I mean, I grew up in Ohio, the saying was knee high by the 4th of July. Yours is way past knee high right now.
And in fact, in here in Maryland, the corn season tends to come on in July.
Uh-huh. So when I farmed it near Harper's Ferry, we transplanted all the corn for Three Sisters. It worked.
How old is the corn compared to other plants?
Oh, it was, I mean, it was in a flat. So it was, I mean, it wasn't root bound, but it was probably too tall. We could probably go in, 2 inches, 3 inches. Anyone here transplant corn? No? I'm sorry?
Were the squash and beans already up?
No.
Okay, so you basically transplanted the corn at the same time as you direct.
Yeah,
sow.
always at the same time, yep.
Okay, got it.
There's a book, Native American Gardening, I think it's called, but it talks about how the different tribes each did their Three Sisters differently. It's pretty neat. So let's see here. You know, doing cauliflower with lettuce. We tried that. This is sort of funny. So we leased the land last year from the school. Got into one of the high tunnels, and the kids had garlic growing. Why in a high tunnel? I'm not sure, but I needed that space. So we went right in and planted lettuce, and sure enough, it was great. We just maximized that space. They got the garlic, we got the lettuce. Everyone was happy. So I think one of the tricks and risks involved is knowing that if you're on multiple plots, is how do you manage your time, especially the day before market. I mean, for years, you know, the day before market that's your harvest day, and you're up late, you're getting all ready for market. You wake up, you're all grumpy. But that's not going to work on a multi-plot system. And so, based on our commercial refrigeration and the system we have, is we schedule to go to each plot a certain day of the week, and we do everything there while we're at that plot. All our weeding, seeding, transplanting, whatever it is. Mondays is the day I plant salad mix. Every Monday I'm planting salad mix. And I just know that, that's our schedule. But we're also harvesting earlier in the week, a lot of crops. And that, it's solely based on commercial refrigeration. It locks in the value, the nutrition, the appearance of that product, so I don't have to harvest everything just the day before market. I don't want to we're probably a little bit short on time, but everyone always asks, how do you do your crop plan? How do you figure that out? And it's definitely, it takes a lot of skill. I mean, it's hard, but you really got to think of the bigger picture of your farm and what goes into crop planning. So your business planning, the mission of your farm, fertility planning, labor, equipment, infrastructure, marketing, all that's got to go into your crop plan. And if you go to the next slide, it allows you to figure out what to grow, how much to grow, where's it going, and when do you plant it. And the neat thing is you can separate it into two different components. So we have our rotation planning, which is our sort of long-term picture of soil sustainability that's going to increase our yield, it's going to reduce our labor because we have much healthier soils. But in the short term, each year we're going to have an annual crop plan. And that's going to look at what's going in that year. And really it's a map, so that if I go to market, anyone could come out, pick up that map, and know what's going where. You know, if it's one of our apprentices or whoever it is, they're going to pick that up and say, okay, today I've got to plant this on this plot. It's all right there. So how we do that is pretty simple. We just work backwards. We have a harvest date. Well, let me start, but off season, you know, all the catalogs are coming in, conferences, Future Harvest Conference. You know, we're going around, we're seeing all the new varieties out there. You know, we're collecting all this information. Our brain's on overload. We're excited to get the greenhouse going. But, you know, we're sort of gathering all our information in the off season. It's come season, you don't want to wait that. So then you're going to sort of work backwards. You're going to start with a harvest projection matrix. You're going to turn that into a planting plan with lots of information. Most people do this on spreadsheets now. There's programs out there. What's that new one that John uses to support? Ag Squared. Ag Squared. I tried it when it first came out. I had a lot of problems with it, and I know a lot of farmers have problems with it. Since then, I've heard they have a webinar on how to use it correctly, and I've heard, like, the webinar. Once you understand how it works, it's a wonderful program. So I look forward to trying that. We use one for our CSA from, it's not Brookford, a farm in Massachusetts. Yeah, I think you have to buy it now for $20. But basically, we put in how many members we have, all the crops we're going, and it breaks it down on a spreadsheet per harvest, what member is getting how much of each crop per week. Oh my gosh. All right, I gotta go quickly here. So there's a publication up here on market gardening from ATRA. Basically, this chart's in it. It's just a simple chart. You know, you list your crop, seeding dates. You know, it's just an example. Intervals between plantings, etc. For our farm, this is sort of what we're looking at. Like I said, salad mix we're doing every week, every 7 days. Green beans every 10 days. I know when we had a mechanical harvester, it was a lot shorter. Spinach every 7 days, radish every 7 days, carrots every 3 weeks. So we break it down. And if you use an Excel spreadsheet, I just want to point this out. So we enter it by our frost date. And then we sort of work from there, so we know it takes this many days to mature. This is how many plantings we could have. I wasn't able to fit it all on the screen, but we'll do up to 8 plantings, the final planting date. But you have to keep in mind that if you use a spreadsheet, and maybe you can correct this, I just don't know how. But because of your frost date, there's going to be certain crops where it's going to come out with your final planting date, but it's you've got to notice that because of your frost date, it's actually not true. See what I'm saying? That what's a good example here? So 7/9 is my final planting date. Because it's an Excel spreadsheet and there's a formula, it's going to go up to 9/25. And I just have to ignore that. I'm not planting melons at 9/25. So this is pretty neat. So we have a wedding July 1st. And so for each event we do, we're going to do something like this, where we'll come up, we'll do everything we're growing for that event, put in days to maturity, how many days before it'll be harvested before the event, and then just work backwards. So we know exactly when the seeding date is. So it goes right into our plan. We look, 4/7, zinnias go in for the wedding. We're all set. Investments. I gotta go quick here. Like I said, the two biggest barriers, access to land and infrastructure and capital cost. At this scale, again, we're not talking tractors, we're not talking, this is the store tractors, maintenance costs. We're really scaling back, hand tools. I think the most expensive piece of equipment I have is the rototiller and fencing. Fencing can be expensive though. Vehicle, you know, I don't need a reefer truck. I don't even have a pickup truck anymore. We just use our everyday vehicle. Just like this guy here, you can't see it, but he's got his kid seat here. Put his tiller in, he's got a seeder. This is my friend Curtis up in Canada. He's on his 3rd year spin farming. He's doing amazing. He had no prior experience. He does everything by bike power. So he's got all his tools. He can bring all his crops. He's got like a little shelf unit. He can have his tiller on there. He does all his deliveries that way as well. All bike power. Rototiller fencing. Fencing could be expensive. I had an estimate for a ½ acre of chain link. It's $18,000. That's absurd. I'm not paying for that. Could be a big cost. Depends what you're trying to keep out. Shed, someplace to store your tools. Tools we'll see in a minute. Irrigation. Soil amendments. At this scale, we're not talking by the ton. We're really talking about feed store fertilizers, things you can get local, rock minerals, but smaller scale. Compost, we try and compost on every site, but also know that compost feeds the soil microbes that make nutrients available. If you need a fertilizer, the compost is not the fertilizer. You still need a fertilizer. Post-harvest station, that could be expensive. It can be cheap. We've used everything from an easy up tent and a hardware store wash tubs, which are like $40, to we had one where we put in a concrete pad and had a permanent building, which is several $1,000s. Concrete's expensive. So that just depends too. Commercial cooler's a big one. We'll talk about it here in a minute. Various marketing supplies, what your market is, CSA. Last year our CSA, we tried something based on the CSA we were an offshoot of, which basically take what you need, pay what you can, bring your own bag. We didn't deny anyone. If they want canning tomatoes, whatever it is, we were willing to give it to them. But you may want a box or some official, sort of share container or something. All right. Greenhouse supplies. We're basically transitioning all from our plastic trays to boxes, wooden boxes. So we started doing this last year. I've recently learned that you actually need to have the soil all the way to the top. There's a lot of advantage to this. One, it's not a petroleum-based product that breaks easily. There's a lot of plastic in the greenhouse. They don't last very long, your 6-packs and trays. But these last, they also hold moisture a lot more. So if you're not able to water, if you have to go somewhere or something, you have to be back, and that stress isn't there getting back to water. And you also don't have to prick out as early. In fact, most crops we didn't even prick out into larger containers before we transplant. Irrigation, like I said, we're not really putting in pumps, motors, digging a well, basically going to a spigot. You may have a manifold, drip irrigation, soaker hoses work. There's neat garden kits that go right up to a spigot, so you can actually transition that with a pressure gauge right into a drip tape. Overwatering, I love to hand water, get to meditate, but usually, when I'm at that plot, because I'm only there that day, I'm not coming back that day. I could put on a sprinkler or something, work on the other half, and make sure I'm getting the watering done while I'm still working effectively while I'm there. Post-harvest, harvest. This is my favorite picture. This is a workshop I did in Pennsylvania. I had a whole harvesting chain going. How do you get the crop out, get the field heat off, get it washed, stored, and to market? All costs. We're now, due to a lot of food safety issues, for our restaurants, we no longer wash our product, or salad mix or anything. We just take it to them, let them wash it. And that takes a lot of liability off of us, surprisingly. It's nice that we don't do that. It's backwards, but I don't really want to touch on food safety, which is the next slide. But I will say, we keep hearing these scary statistics coming out. But I heard a great talk from someone from Ohio State basically saying you have to keep in mind, one, there's that many more eaters on the planet now, and two, they just started recently keeping records. It's something new. So to hear these scary statistics of the melon outbreak, or Tim's Tiny Greens got a recall on Christmas Eve 2 years ago, so don't buy organic salad. It's scary stuff. It's true, but also keep in perspective that it isn't something that's just all of a sudden changing the face of agriculture. So last year, January, President Obama signed the Food Safety Modernization Act. It basically gave the FDA a lot of oversight and authority to manage the safety of our food system. And so deregulate a lot of USDA and EPA authority, The question is now is, even though it was passed, is how is it going to get funded? How are they going to manage it? They haven't come out yet saying this is what's going to be implemented. What was amazing when it first came out was it was basically, here's the Food Safety Act. It applies to all farmers, and there was enough, conversation among small-scale sustainable farmers and even Future Harvest sent out, warnings and contact your senators, that they're able to get Senators Tester and Hagan to put in an amendment saying small-scale growers actually should be exempt from the same regulations that large-scale conventional farms are dealing with. So why should I have to pay the same regulations, follow all the same rules of record keeping for my backyard farm as opposed to the Tyson farm, down in Arkansas? So that amendment was put in, thankfully. And basically, you've got to make the safety operation work for you, for your farm, your scale, your operation. A lot of institutions now are requiring gaps in agricultural practices. It's a volunteer system. It may be law someday soon. I know most institutions, like schools, are saying you may not have to be GAP certified, but you have to be working towards GAP certification in some aspect to sell to us. Commercial refrigeration. It could be a big expense. I've gone to estate sales. I've had convenience stores donate coolers before. It could be a big expense. This was grant funded, so they had a concrete pad and a commercial cooler. But the idea again is allowing me to harvest throughout the week, not being bogged down just until the last day, and I'm locking in that value, that nutritional value, the appearance, the quality of that product. So by the time I get to market, I still can get that premium price. Anyone here heard of a CoolBot or use one? Yeah, you use one? CoolBots are really cool. So it's this nifty little device up here in the corner. I think it's $230 now. But it basically allows you to take an air conditioning unit, a window unit, and trick it into thinking it's a cooler. So you basically just install it, and basically you can build a cooler anywhere. I built one in the field on skids once. You can take a corner in your garage or wherever you are, insulate it, and you've got yourself a cooler. You don't need a full refrigeration system. I did a workshop in Arkansas 3 weeks ago, and it was so cool. There's the guy's CoolBot inside his delivery van. So he's got to plug it in, but he just took that same unit there, room air conditioner, hooked up the CoolBot, and drained it vented out the window, and then the refrigerant just drained out his door. But he just put a CoolBot right in his delivery vehicle. Pretty neat. How much time?
A few minutes. Couple minutes.
You guys want to go over tools real quickly? Tillers? Marketing? Marketing's like 2 slides. Let's skip the crap stuff. Tools, I think, are extremely important to talk about for any farm. There is a huge difference in quality, and from what we know of going to our local hardware store, investing in a tool that's probably not designed correctly, especially like hose. Most of them you're going to see at the hardware store are probably designed for concrete, mixing concrete. There's 1,800 different types of hose out there. And it's important to understand the difference in terms of all handles are made of ash, but how the handle and the head attach. And so it's very important, I would say, invest in high quality tools that, 1, are durable, and 2, that work with your body, that are ergonomically designed correctly. We're, in America, so used to using a short handle hoe, we're bent over all day long, and chopping. And most hoes are not designed that way. So as you can see here, I'm using a swan neck hoe. It's got 72-inch handle, so my back is completely straight. My thumbs are in the upright position, so I'm not thumbs down, bent over chopping, and I'm just sweeping along in the upright position, much better. This is John Jeevens doing a workshop basically showing there's a whole dynamic between your body and the tool. And it depends on the size of the tool, the handle, the type. For double digging, he uses a spade, which is great, for the method of double digging. In this country, we're so used to shovels, which have that rectangular difference here is our soils haven't been worked like English soils that have been worked for centuries, so they're not really moving a lot of soil. They're just prepping it. We need to move soil in this country. And so that's why we use a lot more of our shovel instead of a spade. In terms of tillage, someone mentioned earlier, to till or not to till. It does disrupt the soil microorganisms, it ruins the structure of the soil, but again, for commercial production, I rely on it. I can't invest in double digging all day. So I use walk-behind tractors. Most of them, except the older Troy builds, most of them are coming out of Europe right now, primarily Italy. And for example, this is BCS. I think the farm here has a Grillo, which actually the two companies are in together. There's a few other ones, but these are actually tractors. These are walk-behind tractors designed in Europe, one, because of the terrain, and two, because of the cost. So they really can't afford to buy the large-scale John Deeres that we're all so excited about in this country. But you can buy many different implements for them. Here is a rotary plow that I do my initial sod busting with. That's the tiller. What's neat is some of the other attachments, you actually turn the handlebars around, which actually can offset them. So if I'm tilling or something, I can actually walk alongside of it and not step behind it on my bed. They make a snow blower, mowers, finish mower, sickle bar mower. What? They make a little round baler. Makes round bales about this big. Pretty neat. These are anywhere, for commercial production, we're talking about 5 horsepower. I think the highest they go now is 13, which includes a diesel engine. You can run biodiesel in it. Great, worth the investment. You can buy them used. But a Troy built, except the older models, the newer ones, or like the Mantis, may be good for a raised bed or in a high tunnel, but these are not made for commercial production. They're belt driven. They're harder to work on, especially because the way the motor's positioned with the tiller. So there is a big difference in terms of commercial production. You want to go back one?
Sorry.
Here's a broad fork, which is also used in double digging, but I like to harvest with it too. We'll show that tomorrow, but that's something, there's a video on YouTube of someone showing how to use a broad fork. And this is a big, heavy tool, and this guy's picking it up out of the ground and flipping soil with it. That's totally incorrect. You're going to break your back. So the guy that some of them makes out of Kentucky, Golden Forge, he's making them right out of his garage. He's got some videos on YouTube on how to correctly use it. Really great videos. Next. So we till. We got a 2-foot wide bed. We then go through, and to mark our rows, we can do several different things. One is using a bed preparation rake, and we could take either like a fuel filter or a piece of hose. I even think Johnny sells them now for like $4. These sleeves, you can mark your rows or where you want to plant based on the tines of the rake. And what we also do now is so you can run it long ways down your bed, but now I go in my high tunnel and I also go crossways. I've now made a grid. I know exactly where to transplant. Right now my interns come right out and transplant right behind me. You can use a wheel hoe with that's a for cultivating. We can put a 3-tine or whatever 5-tine on it and mark the rows that way. We plant with this is an earthway seeder. Very nice seeder. It uses plates. You put in per crop. Seed goes in the hopper. There's a little metal piece that builds a furrow. The seed drops down, and then there's a little piece of chain behind it to cover it up. But it also has a bar. You can't see it. You can mark the next row with that. And then last year, after using earthways for so long, we decided to invest in a Jang seeder out of Korea. These are about $400, but these are precision type seeders. So it uses rollers instead of plates, and it's precision. Your markings of seed are exactly where it's going. It could be a problem with earthway. There's seed now that's coated in clay, like carrot seed you can buy now. That's all for rows, for your spacing, but you need special plates for that. It's going to get clogged if you use the regular plates. All right, you guys hungry?
Quick question about the earthway. I mean, isn't that less bio-intensive if you're using the plates because they're especially marked for, like cucumber plates or whatever, so it's a certain distance? I mean, do you have
there's
to
a little bit
adjust
confusion there because bio-intensive, you're transplanting everything based on a hexagon.
Oh, right.
Officially.
Okay.
But you are right, there are plates I use differently for different crops.
Okay.
And for example, like carrots, I'll go over the row twice.
Okay.
And I won't have any problems with quality or quantity, especially if I want baby carrots.
Yeah.
But I do use different plates for some crops just to get a closer spacing. All right, I'm gonna have to skip all this. So here, I'll just give you some websites. There's a lot of good tool suppliers out there. Earth Tools out of Kentucky just does a fantastic job. They're a BCS and Gorilla dealer, but Joel, who's the owner, goes to Europe every year, sees what's out there, brings back the highest quality tools. All forged steel, which is a huge difference versus what you're going to get at your local hardware store, which is usually stamped steel. Johnny's has a lot of Elliott Coleman designs, although Elliott Coleman is not in any type of relationship with Johnny's, so last I heard he has lots more designs if anyone wants to help implement them. Peaceful Valley, which is on the west coast, has a lot of good tools, also seeds and supplies. Rogue is really neat. They're in Kansas, I think, Kansas or Missouri. They take all old agricultural discs and recycle them into three-sided hose. So it's got three sharp sides, all made out of recycled discs. Green Heron is a farm in Pennsylvania. The women on the farm got a grant a few years ago to study how women use tools differently than men, ergonomically speaking. And as a result, they've recently, within the past year or two, come out with a whole line of tools specifically designed for women. And Red Pig. Red Pig's been around a long time on the West Coast. They're a forager. They used to make a lot of tools that they discontinued, which are really rare. But they've looked at how left-handed folks use tools differently than right-handed folks. So they have a whole line of tools just for left-handers. So yeah, I'll just do these 2 slides in terms of marketing. Before I put any seed in the ground, I'm going to have my markets figured out. I just can't invest in knowing that these crops are growing and I've got to sell them. It's just not going to work. So I go through what I would say, the market analysis. Where am I going to sell? Who's my customer? The size of the customer base, location, and influence. Am I going to be selling directly, wholesale? We do a little bit of wholesaling, mostly just to help make up the difference in costs once our CSA money runs out. But again, I can't compete in terms of quantity and with the wholesale price. It's just not worth it for us. Season price fluctuations, which I talked about earlier. Quality standards, pretty important. Time and fuel to reach markets. Chris, you were mentioning you drive 2.5 hours to the Philly market. That's a lot of time off farm, let alone fuel costs. Exactly. And food safety issues. And then, just to sort of talk about what I would say are the golden rules, is 1, know what you're selling. You know the value of that product, what you put into it, why you've selected that product. Your customers are going to want to know. And know who you're selling to. Different customer bases may require the same product but prepared differently. Like I talked about kale, or a lot of ethnic groups may want a specific crop, but grown differently, prepared differently, bunched or bagged. And I try and meet their needs because it's a sale for me. Know your story. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a background, why they're at that farm, how they got involved. This is my friend Fiona, who lives about an hour from here. She's spin farming. This is her 3rd year. That's her elevator speech. You read that. Don't make assumptions about your business plan, your marketing plan. It's just going to get you into trouble. And be customer-oriented, not product-oriented. Like I said, don't go to market and say, I've got all this head lettuce to sell. Who wants to buy it? Figure out the market first and know how you can help meet that demand. Sell features and benefits. Tell folks the practices you use, if it's organic, and what goes into that. Tell folks about all the nutrients and vitamins in that product. It's really going to help. Be a price maker, not a price taker. This is huge. Most markets, and I don't know why this is, but the farmer who has the most quantity usually can set the price. I'm not going in with large quantities, but I'm growing in with high value crops, and I need to make sure I get that price established. And start small, figure out the market, and then grow. And actually, one more. One of the things we started to do, and I don't know, I think some markets here actually are applying this, but we've started to stay away from price per pound. We found that if we pre-bag or pre-bunch everything, especially because we're harvesting throughout the week, and then we're just taking it right to market, we're able to sell more at a higher price. So we set up a tier system. 1 for 3, 2 for 5. That's it. A lot of farms set up several tier systems. For me, that just gets too confusing. So we just do all our quantities based on 1 for 3, 2 for 5. It's a convenience. So I can make this available for whoever who wants it. We're out of time. That's why I'm rushing. But I do just want to share with you. Let's go back. One more. Shoots. Anyone here grow shoots?
Want to.
Want to? How about sprouts? Same person. So, sprouts are regulated by the FDA. It's a food safety issue. Shoots are not regulated yet. And the difference is shoots are grown in some type of soil medium, whether it's vermiculite, soil. What I use is a baby blanket. It's a biodegradable mat made out of jute and cocoa fibers. And so shoots have been a wonderful addition to our farm because I can grow them year-round in the front window of our house with no artificial light. And basically all I'm doing is, like here are sugar pea shoots. There's a few other ones you can do now. I'm trying to do like a medley now. But basically you soak your seed, lay it out on the mat, you stack them in your tray, which make sure it's not the dripless one. And it germinates in 4 days, and then you're harvesting within 10 to 14 days. And we used to cut them and bag them and take them to market. I've realized we're doing a lot better taking the whole tray into a restaurant now. Let them harvest it as they need for garnish or blanching, whatever they want to put it in a salad. I figure I have $2 to $3 invested in each tray. I was selling them for $15. We've been asked to raise our price to $20. Every 10 to 14 days we're going into restaurants with a tray, selling them for $15 to $20, get the tray back, get the mat back, and although I can't reuse this, I put it right down on my walkways. It's a weed control. It's biodegradable. Like I said, I'm putting $2 to $3 in. I water it every day. Maybe takes 3 minutes for all the trays. So if you're looking for some quick cash, shoots. I'm out of time, folks. Thank you so much.